it officially used to be BT's futurologist. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will see that actually my job title has got significantly more boring recently. So yes, I'm no longer a futurologist. I head up customer insight and futures. I should have seen that coming, admittedly. But I got really sick of the crystal ball jokes, to be perfectly honest. So before you ask, because I can feel, yeah, I do have a crystal ball. It doesn't work, sadly. But so to be honest, reading crystal balls all day or reading tea leaves would be very boring. My job is not boring. My job title is more boring. But actually, I have an incredibly fun job. So I'm part of BT's innovation team. I'm based at the lovely Adastral Park, which I'm sure some of you have visited. So we're just outside Ipswich in what used to be the RAF's Innovation and Research Base. So they used to obviously have lots of planes that took off and often crashed, actually. So I like to think we do the same thing about technology because, of course, innovation doesn't always work. But I have to show this slide because in BT, we are rubbish at telling anyone that we do innovation. And not only do we do innovation, we're the third largest investor in innovation in the UK. We're behind a couple of pharmaceutical companies, and we're the third biggest in the world as well, behind AT&T and NTT in our sector. So we do a lot of innovation, and frankly, Adastral Park and our lovely innovation ecosystem, obviously the word of the day, innovation ecosystem, is the reason I don't need the crystal ball. So at Adastral alone, we have about 4,500 people, some of them rather odd, but some of them are the world expert in things like blockchain or quantum key cryptography. And I can literally walk down a corridor and ask them very dumb questions because I keep saying I can get away with dumb questions because I am not a technologist. I am a psychologist by background. And I always justify my existence in the innovation team by saying that it's not just technology that is the big disruptor. In fact, the biggest disruptor is not the technology, it is us. Because unless we adopt the technology, it's pretty useless. So a lot of my role is to try at the very beginning of that innovation process to try and figure out what the behavioural drivers around adoption are, what trends and patterns we're seeing in terms of behaviours, both with consumers, which I'm primarily going to talk about tonight, and also employees, because we're human too. Actually, they're the same people as well. So we do get very, very big intersections between the two bits of research. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is the consumer bit. We call this research, well, this year we called it Chat, Tap, Talk, hopefully for reasons you will discover as we go along. But this is a very large piece of research. It's a fairly unique piece of research as well in that we've been doing it for a long time. We started back in 2010, not particularly ambitious in 2010 compared with some of the rest of the years, 500 customers per country, 2 countries. Then we propel ourselves to about this time last year, when we published our latest piece of research. You'll notice we do it pretty much every other year. We have got more and more ambitious. So we've got 10 countries, 500 customers now. And we ask these customers a lot of questions around how do they want to interact with organizations, what channels are they using. And actually, for me, the critical question to ask is why as well. So I'm going to present some of the trends that we found from the last iteration of the research. I'll pull out some interesting stuff. You're going to see the global average. I would say if you're, obviously most of us are interested in the UK. The UK is pretty much bang on global average, to be perfectly honest. We are very average. There are some really, really weird trends in some of the other countries that we're looking at, but I'm going to primarily talk about the UK today. So the first trend is not a surprise if any of you are into customer experience or customer service, because this is, I call it the E-word trend. If you go to a customer experience conference, there is always a session on either easy or effort. It depends. It doesn't really matter which you choose, but it's the same thing, basically. But this is all about the fact that customers don't want to work particularly hard when they interact with organizations. And so that's the first thing. How do we make it easier for customers? The depressing thing about the stats is actually we're not getting better at this. There could be a few reasons for that. Digital customers typically set the benchmark at Amazon. And as we know, Amazon is often the company that's cited as very easy to do business with. If things go right, to be perfectly honest, and most of the time they do, when things go wrong, largely they can cope, but if it goes very wrong, it does derail. So how do we become a little bit more like Amazon as businesses, I think, is one very big question. We can't, is the answer. We've got a lot more legacy often than Amazon has. Why should we even try is another big question. Well, a lot of the stuff, and we spotted this as a trend a few years back, a lot of the stuff, certainly in the academic field that we've been working on, particularly with places like Henley Business School, has been linking this behaviour back to things like loyalty and retention. Now, obviously in BT, that's a very big thing. And we can also find out, not rocket science, we've been measuring something called the Net Easy score for a number of years in BT, which is pretty much asking our customers, how easy is it to do business with BT? And you mark us difficult, you mark us easy, you mark us don't know. It's a bit like the Net Promoter Score, to be honest. We stole the Net Promoter Score, don't tell anyone. But we come out either easy or difficult, and then again, the question is why? And we found lots of really not remarkable things, to be honest. So the first thing is, if people are finding us difficult, they're more likely to leave us, 40% more likely to leave us for a start. It links into things like the Net Promoter Score, which is our primary strategic score, because again, people finding us difficult are very unlikely to recommend us. But we find our Net Easy score gives us also a lot of clues as to why this is happening, and a lot of clues as to how we make stuff easier. So, for example, the first project we set off was one around our IVR. You know, those lovely press 1s, press 2s. Everyone loves those. For us, it got to about press 52, I think, at one point. So that's not good. Frankly, customers were finding that a little bit difficult, so we redesigned it. We use a 3x3 hierarchy. We've simplified the language we use. We try and use the customer's language, not our language. And actually, there was a very big reflection in our Net Easy score. So we can use it similarly if we train our agents differently, if we redesign our website. Instantly, it gives us a clue that the Net Promoter Score doesn't necessarily give us. So I keep saying this is a lovely, pragmatic, operational score that really takes the temperatures of how customers are finding us. But for innovation, the one thing we need to think about is any innovation we put in front of customers needs to make their life easier. That's the very big question. I usually push back onto the technologists. I'll give you an example later. The second trend, again, will not come as a surprise to you. Oddly enough, the smartphone is becoming the window on our world, to the extent at which we're almost in a post-PC world here. We're throwing away our keyboards and our mice, and we're, swiping and maybe talking to our devices. Although, to be honest, I've yet to have a particularly profound conversation with Siri, Cortana, or even Alexa, because they're pretty dumb. But they're evolving. However, so on that particular point, we've just done some work with an airline around voice assistants, and we did a comparison of checking in using an app, which is the obvious thing to do with a smartphone, versus Alexa. It took us approximately 2 minutes to check in and get our boarding card using the app. It took us approximately 6.5 minutes using Alexa, because Alexa insisted on reading everything I couldn't take on the plane out, to get to the point where I almost slit my wrists. I know I cannot take a bomb on the plane, all right? So was that making it easier for customers? I think that's one big thing. Alexa skills are very exciting, but actually they might not be the answer to all the questions. And similarly, apps are an interesting one. We interviewed a lot of customers about apps and what apps they downloaded, and oddly enough, if you're a bank, you're laughing. Everyone downloads their banking app. Brilliant. Do they download any others? Actually, I'm told reliably that the average number of apps that customers download every month is 0, because we don't download that many, and to be honest, we delete more than we download, mainly because we're making a trade-off. Often, at the moment, my phone is pretty full. So if I download an app, I have to delete personal photos or videos. So that's one big problem with apps. It takes up space. So in the innovation space, we put this into our tech scouts who work around the world to look at startups. And they found an interesting one in Silicon Valley called Wrap. And what Wrap does, it's an app without having to download an app. So it's app-like behavior through a link that we send to a customer. So rather than having to trade off on my memory, all I do is I click the link, and it gives, to be honest, it looks exactly like an app. We can personalize things like an app. So this is kind of good because it solves the technical problem. Doesn't mean that people will use your app, sadly, even if it's not clogging up the phone. So I think we need to make sure that they're useful and they do actually do something for customers to make their lives easier. But this certainly solves one of the technical problems around downloading apps. I get really, really excited about this slide because I'm a bit of a geek and I like graphs. But one of the other things that we're finding is that there is a distinct shift in the way that we're using channels to contact organisations. So this omnichannel trend, I hate the word omnichannel, by the way. If you can think of a better word, please tell me. But omnichannel, we're using a lot of channels. Actually, customers are not omnichannel. We asked them, are you omnichannel? We got a completely blank look back. What the hell is omnichannel? So actually what we found was customers are goal directed. So they have a goal and then they have a lot of channels that they can fulfill that goal over. So this graph tells me a number of things. The first thing is we're finding that actually customers are contacting us less over all channels. So contact is not going up on any channel with two exceptions, apps and also chats, which is the big one I'm going to talk about. So the phone's an interesting one. I work with a lot of banks and insurance companies. What we're finding is people call less, but actually when we look at average call handle time, it's going up by about 40%. So what we're finding is the phone is still top priority actually for customers. It's always the phone and email. The phone is taking on the niche stuff, the emotive and complex stuff, and that's a suitable channel for that. We're getting channels like a trendy channel. There were whole conferences on Twitter for customer service a couple of years back at the peak of its hype cycle. It's going down as a preference now. So people aren't necessarily contacting us on social media. Often it's a last resort. And also, it's a classic channel shift channel. I call it a channel shift channel because basically, as a company, playing everything out in public is really brave. So typically what happens on Twitter, for example, is you have to try and shift the customer onto one of the other more private channels because firstly, you do not know who Fuzzy Duck 365 is. So, you know, that kind of stuff means we have to shift them into a private conversation. So it's intriguing just to see that actually contact is going down, but channels are getting their niche. So why are people using different channels? That's the really interesting question. And over and above that goal that I said earlier is an intention state. So we interviewed a lot of customers about this and asked them to tell us stories around how and why they use channels. And it became quite evident that they tend to be in one of three intention states. One is positive, one is negative, one is neutral. And those intention states drive behaviours more than age, more than demographic. So these intention states, we call them visionary, customer in crisis, and utilitarian. Visionaries are doing positive stuff. It's stuff they want to do. They're moving house. They're going on holiday. They're planning the perfect picnic. All of that we're willing to invest time, effort, and energy in. So we do our homework. We have a lot of choice. So we'll, really research stuff. We sometimes get a bit paranoid about our choices. So that's the point at which we probably either need to put some little bit of advice in, maybe via a bot, more on those later, or provide human contact to just say, yep, that's absolutely the right thing to do. Yes, that will arrive on time. They are not the problem customers. They use a lot of channels. They will get a bit confused if you put complexity in front of them. But actually, the problem customers are the negatively motivated ones. We call them customers in crisis. They might have originally started in visionary mode and they've swapped, or they've started in crisis. Now, the trouble with crisis is there are weird chemicals that flood into our brains if we're angry or frustrated. And those weird chemicals do one very, very serious thing in terms of design. It halves our short-term memory capacity. So normally when I'm calm, my short-term memory capacity is between 7 and 9 bits. So if I'm designing an IVR, I did used to design them, by the way, press 1 for this, it's 2 bits. Press 2 for this, press 3 for this. Might be able to get another one in, but I might just leave it there. I'm calm at that point. Now I get angry and frustrated. My short-term memory capacity halves. Press 1 for this, press 2 for. I can't remember what 1 was for. So instantly we see that putting complex things in front of customers in crisis is not going to work. Big FAQs, not going to work. They're not going to read them. Customers in crisis, typically the behaviour is I lift up the phone and I want to talk to somebody. It's very difficult to shift them out of that behaviour pattern. So typically these guys are not that omnichannel. They typically want to reach out and get some help. The trouble is we're not always positive or negative. There's a neutral state we call utilitarian. This is routine stuff, buying carrots, paying bills. I do not want wow. I just want to get it done. And this is where quick and easy really come in. And actually that's where self-service can really be powerful because we don't want the faff. So this gives us a clue. Perhaps we can start to create different customer journeys based on those intention states. Actually, the first project we did was, again, with an airline. So could we start to pick up data from the customer to try and figure out what state they were in and then do appropriate signposting? So for visionaries, yeah, maybe give them a bot, maybe give them a phone number. For customers in crisis, they're probably going to want a phone number. For utilitarians, push them to self-serve. So they're still our customer, so it didn't go horribly wrong, and we've done it with a number of other customers afterwards. So what intention state are your customers in, and how do you actually give them the right channel? Well, my percentages have slipped. It's always the case. Now, there's lots of things about the phone that I could say. I would say the first thing is there's a lot of myths about millennials out there. Millennials are not alien beings. And actually, what we found when we interviewed 16 to 18-year-olds as part of the survey was that they were behaving a lot like their parents when they're in crisis. In other words, they do lift up the phone. Hence, 77% of them are saying they still want a phone number on apps and websites. To be honest, they don't think the phone is a primary channel. They think it's an escalation channel, whereas older customers do regard it as a primary channel. The next thing we find is, because often it is being used as an escalation channel and people have tried to do it online, the most hated thing now is that message. You know when you're on the phone and it goes, "Did you know you could do this online?" Yeah, I just tried that. So that's a bit of a problem. Often the demand is being created by the fact that tools are not working, and also complexity is shifting upwards. So our agents are having to deal with much more complex stuff, hence they're sometimes having to put people on hold or ask around. So we need to make sure that we can boost either their training or the tools that they have to boost their knowledge to face a complex customer. Video is another channel that's small but growing, and particularly in a couple of areas. Firstly, we've got the YouTube phenomenon. People are not well, they're not reading FAQs anymore. I think people have lost the ability to read. They're watching videos. So the videos on YouTube are brilliant, but they're not very personalised. So hence, again, when we were in the innovation space, we got our innovation scouts to find a company called Idemu, which is an Israeli startup. They're quite big now, actually. They're not really a startup anymore. What Idemu does is it's like a YouTube video, but it uses your data. So it's about you. So it's like a mail merge for video. It takes your data, squirts it into a video template. Now, we first trialled this with a bank, actually, and we got some quite interesting results on the proof of concept. Firstly, customers clicked the video, which is unusual because it's sometimes spam. We just delete it. So people watched it. On average, they watched it twice. In one insurance example, one guy watched his over 50 times. I think he has a problem. But we're now, it's actually part of our portfolio now, so, and we do use it internally to welcome people to BT. Obviously, a lot of the banks are also using it. And the good thing for them was they were getting a lot of cross-sell, upsell on the back of very complex products like loans and mortgages. So we can start to use video that way. Obviously, video can be used in other ways. So we've got the Skype, the FaceTime type interactions. We're finding in two areas where expert interaction is very important. So mortgage advice and also healthcare advice. We're finding this is a growth area. In healthcare, if you're in London, you may well have used Babylon, which is an app I can download onto my smartphone. There's a bot that triages me, and if it feels as if I do need a medical consult, I can choose to have a video conference with a doctor. I can literally show that doctor the boil on my bum if I want to. I'm sure the doctor will enjoy that, but that's just adding a visual component. And we know that things like trust is good on video. Maybe it's not an ideal situation. We don't think it's going to replace face-to-face because there's something unique about face-to-face. But if it's almost like face-to-face, and if you're looking at scarce skills, as medical skills are, actually getting the customer to see a doctor fast rather than having to wait a couple of weeks to see their local GP is actually causing quite a lot of of positive customer feedback. So we can start to use that in very different ways. Actually, this is an example we're again using internally called Site Call. It's a variation on video, but what we can do here is effectively using the smartphone again, using the camera on the smartphone, send a link to the customer. We're using it for broadband diagnostics at the moment. So we can send a link to the customer, and the customer agrees to have an agent at the end of the line can take over their camera and the light on their camera as well on their smartphone. So for us, typically what happens is, and a real example, one lady was saying, my Digibox is broken. I can't use my Digibox. What's going on? And we were going, well, what's wrong? And she said, I don't know. My Digibox is broken. So we said, right, click on this link and just show us what's happening. And what we rapidly found out was she was using the wrong remote control. And we can do stuff with wires. So basically, for us, it means that we don't have to send an engineer out to go, you're using the wrong remote control. For them, again, the problem gets solved quickly. So it's a win-win. Chat, though, is the growth channel. And actually, globally, we're seeing phenomenal growth, 20% in 2 years since we did the last survey. There are a number of reasons for that. It's a digital-first channel. It's an easy channel. It's economically a lot more attractive than something like email as well for most corporates. And actually, agents quite like it as well. But what we're finding is that chat is taking a lot of the mundane transactional stuff that you don't really want your humans to do, which is why we get the conversation about chatbots. Now, chatbots are most of my life at the moment. I'm working on about 8 chatbot projects, primarily in financial services and insurance. And it's intriguing. You might have noticed there's some hype about this around at the moment. So, and the hype has hit the customer. Actually, customers were not interested remotely in chatbots 2 years ago. Now 73% of them are saying it's going to improve customer experience. Now, the trouble is, I'm not sure the evidence is out there that that is true. There are some atrocious bots out there. There are, however, some very good ones too. Now, my personal favourite is Margot the wine bot. Lidl. This is Lidl that have done Margot the wine bot. So Margot the wine bot solves that thorny problem of food-wine combinations. Now, I have to confess, I do not drink wine. Sorry, but I always get the wine choice wrong, and my friends do drink wine. So what I do normally do is say, what are we having for dinner? And then I ask Margot what the perfect combination would be. Now, apparently, fish and chips, it's champagne. That just increased your bill for the Friday fish eating. And of course, Lidl can sell the champagne off the back of this, so it's a win-win situation again. Now, Margot's a good example because Margot does not talk about everything. Margot only talks about wine and food combinations. So it's a very deep, very narrow field. And typically, these bots are dumb. They do not work by magic. They work by data. So having a very deep, narrow set of data means that Margot does deliver on promises. The trouble is that over the past few years that I've been working with chatbots, they're not as easy as we may think. Firstly, human language is very complicated. So actually, that's one very big problem. We still haven't passed the Turing test, and Alan Turing set that in the 1940s. We still cannot pretend that a computer is like a human. They don't work by magic. It's all about the data I was saying earlier. If you've got crap data, you're going to have a crap chatbot, basically. It's garbage in, garbage out. And actually, a couple of the projects we've been working on, we've had to completely re-engineer data sets because they simply were not fit for purpose. And that's cost, of course. So if you're looking at taking out cost, might not necessarily work. What's it appropriate for? Maybe not complaints. So complaints, any of you who deal with complaints will know they're quite long. So the first problem there is human language is vastly redundant. So if it's a long complaint, I need to strip out all of the redundancy and leave the bits that are actually quite important. That is difficult for a start. So maybe complaints are a problem. Second thing is, particularly in the UK and Ireland and bizarrely the Netherlands, sarcasm tends to come into it as well. Now, we know bots do not get sarcasm. Why would an algorithm know that thank you to a particular train operating company for my free sauna this morning is sarcasm? but then the algorithm has never been on a train and it's probably never had a sauna. And I would have to teach it that that was sarcasm. So I can tag it as sarcasm, but why would I do that? The second one's even worse. I don't even know where to start with this one. It was so good to see that your maintenance department hadn't spoilt things by making unnecessary repairs. Again, the algorithm thought that was brilliant. It's not. We know it's sarcasm, but that's because we understand sarcasm, and that's quite difficult to teach an algorithm. Partially, it's context as well that we can't necessarily gather. Things like emotional context is starting to get solved, so we can use things like voice stress analysis to figure out whether people are angry or frustrated over things like IVRs. What do you do with that is a very big question. Do you hang up? Do you send it to your best agents? Even more disturbingly, there are a couple of startups, mostly in Silicon Valley, that are using the camera on the smartphone to start to analyze micro expressions on your face to figure out, are you happy, are you sad? Slightly scary, that one. And the scarier bit is Apple have just bought the biggest one called Emotion. So read the Apple terms and conditions, because at some point, Apple may be looking at your facial expression and figuring out how you're feeling. So we can use this stuff. It does have a ripple-on effect into your front line. What it tends to do is good, I think. I hate calling it artificial intelligence because it's not really that intelligent. What it does is very good at pattern matching. It's very good at consistency. It never wants a cup of tea. So it can work very hard. But actually what it does is give even more complexity onto your front line. And that's why I call it augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. Now, we did a paper last year called Botman versus Super Agents, mainly because I like superhero movies, and it's always good to get a reference into my work. But this is, I mean, we did some personas as part of that work around who we thought might be in the front line. So Sally, who picks up where the bot has left off. And actually, in the innovation space at the moment, our priority is, if we've got a bot, firstly, we need to figure out what that conversation was about so we can then skills-based route the conversation to the right agent with the right skills, and then also bring that session across to the agent so the customer does not have to repeat themselves. So we're not considering standalone bots. We're making sure that those bots are plumbed in to the existing CRM and contact center solutions. We've got Paula sticking the fork into the spaghetti of back-end process because it's gone horribly wrong. Again, computer says no frequently on that one, so the human needs to pick up the baton. Natalie's negotiating. It's rules-based negotiation, but it's also social and emotional, and that's the bit that's really hard to automate. So we're probably going to need a lot of negotiators, I suspect. Tony's our techie. Now, I learned back in the 90s, I did my first neural network project, was actually my first job in BT back in 1990 when I was 6 years old, obviously. Thank you for laughing. I did a lot on neural networks for complex fault diagnostics, and I would go and interview BT engineers who are brilliant at complex fault diagnostics, and I get these lovely decision trees around, this is why I decided it was this fault rather than this fault. Then you'd hit the bottom of the tree and you'd say, why did you decide it was that, not that? And they'd go, gut feeling. I can't put that in a neural network. That's in their heads. And that's the problem. A lot of tacit information is in the heads of our experts, not just technical experts, but experts in anything. So again, how do we keep them in the loop? And actually, how do they teach the bots as well? So how do we start to transfer that knowledge across? I've also included Chris, who's a gig economy advisor in the cloud. We bring Chris in when we need very specific skills, and then he's not employed by us anymore. He's employed by somebody else. So that's the kind of thing, the ripple effect that we're seeing. This means that actually we've probably got to upskill our frontline and actually give our frontline access to artificial intelligence as well to boost their knowledge and augment them. Very briefly, because I know I'm pretty much at the end of my time now, security does matter. The problem with security is the more secure I make it, often the less easy. This is why we get a lot around biometrics, which has been around in the innovation space for about 25 years. But frankly, again, if I've got a smartphone and a camera presenting a bit of my body to that camera, rather than having to remember 85 different passwords, is brilliant. Also, voice stress analysis we can do on voice as well. So that's certainly coming of age. And again, the banks, insurers are starting to adopt biometrics, and my face is my password now. Finally, I think this is an interesting trend to finish on, which is all about me. frankly. I call this the me economy. So this is all about, I trade my data, whether that's social media, location data. I will trade my data with you, but I want something back. This is an economy. It's a transaction. Now, the first step on that transaction is personalization. So this is all about learning about me and my preferences so that you then personalize it and make it easy. Now, we're comfortable with that. That's largely what Amazon and Netflix do. Brilliant. That helps me. It makes it easier. So once we've done personalization, we can start to get a little bit more clever. We can start to become proactive. So we can start to tell customers things that they need to know before they have to ask. The beauty of this is we start to manage demand out rather than demand managing us, which is why, again, in the startup space, we're working with, actually, it's a local startup to here, a London startup called Contact Engine. Now, Contact Engine basically is very clever. It learns about you. It learns about your channel preferences. It learns that when you're looking at those channels, it learns probably what you need to know from a proactive message perspective. So they're doing a lot with smart meters at the moment. It's pushing a message out on your channel of choice at the time that you're most likely to see it, and basically, hopefully, again, making life easier for you so you don't have to contact the organization. So personalization, then proactivity, then we can kick the algorithms in because we've got the data now. We can start to become predictive, but that can get very creepy. Tesco, I was with not that long ago, their analysts claim that they know from your data whether you're about to get divorced. Would I use Contact Engine to send you an email going, I'm really sorry to hear you're getting divorced? You might not know. That's the problem. So again, human in the loop is pretty important here. Is it too creepy? And this is relevant because it's a me economy and we are in the age of GDPR. So if I find it creepy, if it's not useful, I will deny my consent for you to have my data. This is a particularly thorny problem as we go into the Internet of Things, which, as a psychologist, I find slightly disturbing because to me, it sounds like all of my devices are now talking about me behind my back. And again, if I don't think there's a benefit to that, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to turn it off, which means that the whole Internet of Things concept does not work. That's why I was saying people are the most disruptive and innovative part of this. And I think this is a really thorny one for us to solve. How do we sell to the customer the benefits of having their data? So those were the key trends around. I hope you figured out why it's called Chat, Tap and Talk now. If you do want access to the research, we can certainly give you access if you like numbers and figures. No problem. If you're having trouble sleeping, probably no problem. But thank you very much for listening.